So, you want to beat Morena's card game, is that right? Let's see how we can do that by diving into the events of Hunter x Hunter chapters 407 to 410. First, a necessary but quick recap. Hockenberg's funeral is underway. Krollo's still hunting for his Nenner match. Meanwhile, Sarainik's friends are on high alert after one of their buddies goes missing. Maybe you don't recall these goofy goobers, and I can't blame you since it's been a while since we last seen them, but Sarainik has his own platoon of private soldiers who trained with him in Kakin's military academy growing up. These soldiers were given the mission to capture and bring back Morena after discovering dead Char-R members in the abandoned Heil-Ly hideout. But after learning about the existence of Nen, they tried to avoid Morena while cooperating with the other mafia families. Meanwhile, Morena's plotting the capture of one of Sari's private soldiers after one of Morena's spies gets reduced to flesh by Sarainik. In retrospect, this chapter has a lot of foreshadowing scattered throughout, like these panels, with one of them expressing relief that Borksen is still the same Bork that they know, and this page where the position of the panel suggests the Nen affinities of the soldiers, Borksen appearing in the bottom center of the frame, which aligns up perfectly with the specialist position in the Nen diagram. And lastly, this Mikasa lookalike, Mama-Lee, asks what they should do in the event that one of them gets captured by the Heil-Ly. Lo and behold, our hero wakes up in the Heil-Ly hideout. And just like our beloved Sandwich, she's already got a plethora of names. So what do we call her? Is it Borksen, Volksen, or maybe the Japanese version, Bokusen? This might seem like a trivial topic, but there are some wild implications behind the names that I haven't heard anyone mention yet. I'll reserve those for later, but for now, let's just go with Bork. Morena asks Bork to join the Heil-Ly, but since this is Yoshihiro Togashi writing the series, she comes up with this elaborate high-stakes card game to try and convince Bork into saying yes. This game acting as a condition for Morena's Nen ability to work, thereby amplifying its power, helping her to better support her members. In this game, you are the child, and Morena is your mommy. Game hasn't even started, Wee One. You have 5 cards face down, she's got 7 face up. You pick a card from her deck, it gets sent to the graveyard. She picks one from yours, that gets sent to the graveyard. This continues until the child has 1 card remaining. That card is the answer to Morena's request. Let's take a look at each of our cards, then Morena's. The yes card is, you guessed it, saying yes to Morena's request. Basically, you concede defeat and join her cause. Not exactly what we want here. Getting no as your final card is even worse. It's the equivalent of certain death, and Morena considers it a willful rejection to her request, which means you're just another point for them to level up with. Let's avoid this one. The reverse or R card allows you to take any card from the graveyard back to your deck. This is one we definitely want to keep an eye out for. If Joker is our final card, it will randomly transform into either a yes or a no, both of which are responses we're trying to avoid, so another useless option. The X card allows you to exit the game without giving a response. You don't even get hunted down by her or her cronies, and she leaves your allies alone too, so this is the winning card we want. Now let's peep Morena's deck. The following cards have Morena explain a topic in detail, with the exception of the Question A card. First, picking the Aim card will have Morena explain her overall goal. Choosing the Power card will reveal her Nen ability. If we choose Question A, we can ask as many questions as we want, and Morena has to answer. But instead of getting a detailed explanation, you're given one of 3 responses. Yes, no, or yes and no. If we want to get more detail to a response in Question A, we'd need to select the Question B card. Important to note that by choosing Question A or B cards, we're not allowed to ask about our goal or powers, hence the existence of the Aim and Power cards. The yes with a question mark card will have Morena explain the consequences of joining the Heil-Ly, and the no with a question mark is the same, but if your final response to her request is no. Either way, Morena is going to explain what happens if you have either a yes or no by the end of the game, so this is just a way for us to know the consequences beforehand. The deal card is another important one, as it acts as a second return, guaranteeing 1 card back from the graveyard, but only if you fulfill Morena's small request. You're free to decline her request, but this would effectively waste a turn, as the deal card would just get sent to the graveyard. Now that we get the gist of the game's rules, what's the strategy we're going for? We gotta think from the perspective of an expert, and immediately one of the first things we should do then is try to understand just who we are going up against. Because simply knowing that she's got a thing for JRPGs, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and has the latest gaming consoles isn't sufficient. Like Gon famously says, if you want to get to know someone, find out what makes them angry. Bork has seen Hunter x Hunter, so she goes straight for the purpose card. Since her motivation is tied to her goal, There should be a lot for her to explain here, right? Oh. What? Yeah, she's totally nuts. Might be your first impression, but she appears to have a fairly legitimate reason, at least for Kakin's destruction. Because when Kakin isn't preoccupied with having a free-for-all battle to the death for the throne, every couple of years they hold a carnival where a royal entourage visits a village at random, partitioning its people into two categories, entertainers and others, and then they proceed to indulge in feasts spanning multiple days without rest. And to nobody's surprise, Morena has one of the most tragic backstories in the entire series. She was born to a mother completely unconscious of her own birth, who entertained the royal entourage for days without rest, dying as a result. Carnival orphans are scarred at birth, sent to an institution for human trafficking operated by the Heil-Ly, also connected to a back alley hospital where they treat the mothers. As a side note, this guy named Sodom was introduced as a back alley doctor and hitman, meaning he's probably one of the original Heil-Ly members who worked at this hospital. There, they scientifically sort these orphans into two categories: second-track fakers and meat. We were told before that second-track fakers are illegitimate relatives of the king, and so they live in anonymity, promised a life of luxury so long as they remain in the shadows. Instead, they're given the privilege of becoming a boss to one of Kakin's 3 mafia families. Meat, on the other hand, don't get anything since they're ordinary people born on the lowest totem pole. As such, they are burdened with the responsibility of entertaining the royal entourage. But this all begs the question of, why do both second-track fakers and meat have their faces scarred at birth? The Lese Majesty law states that genetic testing of royals is forbidden. Therefore, tracing inheritance to one of the royals wouldn't be possible. So how would they be able to distinguish those who have royal blood from those who don't? My guess is they use some form of eugenics to determine how they would get sorted. Orphans with qualities they deem superior, traits like intelligence and strength, would automatically be considered to have royal DNA, getting sorted as second-track fakers, and the rest would be thrown to the wayside as meat. So Morena has been living as meat for a majority of her life. But wait, she's supposed to be the Heil-Ly boss. Wouldn't that make her a second-track faker instead? That's where we get the big reveal that this Morena is actually not the real Morena. The real Morena was killed by this fake Morena. I've come to a pretty big realization on who, or rather, what I think this Morena is. No, it's not that she's Sheila, Sarasa, Gyro, or any other character. It's way, way bigger than any of that. So if that's something that you would be interested in, let me know in the comments. Now, notice before how I said entourage, meaning that this isn't exclusive to the royal family, but anyone associated by extension. People like, I don't know, this guy who's been spreading his seed for 30-something odd years. This presents a possible way for Beyond to conduct his cucking scheme. While the king is off doing his business with the entertainers, Beyond could set his sights on one of Nasubi's queens. And if Saraynik really is the prince child of Beyond, born from one of these carnivals, then perhaps it would make sense why Saraynik developed his philosophy of distinguishing people based on whether they are useful trash or useless trash. The irony being, he'd belong to one of those groups if he really was conceived at one of these festivals. I'm seeing a lot of parallels being drawn between Morena and characters like Krollo, Meruem, and Gyro, but I personally think she shares the most in common with Saraynik. They both have a thing for video games, both place heavy importance in developing trust from their subjects, they also enjoy toying with the traitor amongst them, and Morena discriminates against people based on whether they're useful to her goal. This is evident in her assessment of specialists, that if they aren't allied with Morena, then there's simply another point for her to accrue. Another interesting but less obvious similarity is that Morena has somewhat of a dual personality, considering she's playing fake Morena while also being her own subject. Guardian Spirit Beasts are reflections of their host's personality, and Saraynik having 2 of them hints that he's also got this dual identity aspect to him. If we are to entertain the idea that Ceres Beyond's son with one of the queens, then they both share no direct lineage with the king, and are essentially impersonating as prince or second-track faker. There are a lot of cool parallels between the two, and I thought this was worth mentioning to understand Morena just a little bit better. Now it's time for some references, since there are quite a few here. Carne levar, which means to literally remove or raise meat, is the Latin term used to signify the upcoming fast during the religious holiday called Lent, which commemorates Jesus fasting for 40 days in the desert while resisting Satan's temptations. Kakin's carnivals draw inspiration from these Christian carnivals, where participants parade the streets en masse and indulge in extravagant feasts, particularly consuming meat, before abstaining during Lent. In Brazil, Carnival is a national celebration that has endured some of the biggest historical events, including World War I, World War II, and even the death of the Baron of Rio Branco. The first cancellation in 108 years occurred in 2021 due to a global phenomenon that eerily parallels an infection that's spreading on the boat. And after a 2-year-long hiatus, the festivities resumed, though some were disrupted by floods and landslides. Likewise, Morena notes that the last carnival was just 2 years before the events of the succession battle, and Kaken continued these carnivals even after the nation transitioned into a democratic republic. She concludes that Kaken never changed and never will. Earlier, I touched on the implications of Borksen's name. Before diving deeper, let me just say this. Using name etymology to make predictions is very risky business. But in Borksen's case, I think the meaning behind her name seems uniquely relevant to her storyline, especially in its connection with Morena and Cyrenik. For starters, Bork is a transitive verb used to describe an attack or defeat of a candidate for public office. Alternatively, it can denote the malfunction of an electronic device. With the Heil-Ly's goal of killing princes, and Contagion being like a game software installed into a device, there are some fascinating inferences that can be made here, but I'll save those for the theories discussion. The Japanese term Borksen describes a collection of divination practices used to foretell an event or predict an outcome. Of course, it's not like we haven't seen fortune-telling as a Nen ability in the past, but given Bork's ties to Sandwich, I think it's far too intentional for this to be a coincidence. He's the only one currently in the story with an ability that sees into the future, and I think Togashi giving Borksen a name that is based on this aspect might be a clue as to what ability she could develop. My guess is Borksen gets visions of an undesirable outcome, tries to analyze what actions would lead her to that outcome, and does her best to avoid it. Think of Neon's fortunes, but if it only applied to Neon. I think this kind of ability fits her personality well, since Bork doesn't like conflict and relentlessly avoids anything that would get in the way of her desired uneventful life. She's willing to go to such extreme lengths in order to preserve that future. But what's the connection here to Morena? There's one historical figure I believe Togashi is referencing. That person is Maki Borksen, a samurai from 17th century Japan. Borksen wasn't just a warrior, he was also a renowned painter and one of the earliest manga artists. Borksen was the first to write stories about the Japanese yokai, Nupeppo, which are faceless, shape-shifting creatures made of humanoid flesh that roam graveyards and abandoned temples. They are rare to come by, but when they appear, they cause chaos and frighten nearby villagers. In her story, Maki details an eyewitness account of a Nupeppo appearing in the courtyard of the Tokugawa shogun, the ruler of Japan. Disgusted by its appearance, the shogun banishes the Nupeppo, only for a wise man to later suggest that the creature resembled the legendary Ho, and by taking a bite of its flesh, it would reinvigorate your constitution. In other words, consuming the Nupeppo's flesh would grant you power. The legendary Ho in this case is a shorthand for Daijo-Ho, a title given to a retired emperor who devotes his life to becoming a Buddhist monk. In my previous video, I mentioned the references Togashi makes to the Sokushinbutsu, or the Japanese monks who meditate into their deaths to achieve enlightenment. I believe the first king of Kaken did something similar to propagate his post-mortem nen for the succession war, and when you layer in Maki Borksen's story, you could start to see the thematic connections between these different storylines. Like the Nupeppo, Morena has no true identity, existing solely as meat. She resembles King Nasubi, but only because she takes the form of the real Morena. Her contagion, which bestows Nen abilities to infected individuals, is a metaphorical nod to consuming Nupeppo's flesh for power. Now, does this mean that Borksen's going to have a manga artist Nen ability or something along those lines? As cool as that would be, probably not. However, I do think this is all a giant metaphor for how Bork will write Morena's story as the arc unfolds. She's not down for this ambitious, let's end the entire world gig, as that obviously gets in the way of her mundane future. Hence why I think whatever ability she'll end up getting will involve something along the lines of preserving an uneventful outcome or breaking Morena's contagion. Speaking of abilities, the next card for us to choose is the Power card, as that will give us more information about Morena's Nen ability. Morena compares her ability to being a pyramid scheme, where each of her children can become a parent like Morena after gaining a certain amount of points, unlocking abilities of their own, and being able to spread their circle further. This is an incredibly reductionist explanation, as she conveniently leaves out any mention of a kiss. She does state that her circle can be spread, but does not mention the means by which this happens. If she had told Bork that she infects individuals, that would give Bork a sense of the consequences. For example, manipulation through her Nen saliva. One could simply wave this off as Morena dumbing it down for Borksen to understand, but I think this is also her justification for not sharing the full picture of her ability, because, quite frankly, she doesn't need to. Her explanation just needs to be deemed acceptable for Bork. But this also works in Morena's favor, leaving just enough info to spark Borksen's curiosity, while cleverly stringing her along a path of cards Morena wants her to select. And as we come to find out later, she saves the kiss info for when it matters most, during the deal card request. But we're still not attuned to why Morena needs Borksen. How can she know what her ability is when she hasn't even awakened Nen? That's where we get the revelation that, unsurprisingly, Borksen's a specialist. And specialists are indeed very special. Morena tells Bork she needs a specialist to accomplish her goal, and that the longer this game goes on, the higher the risk to Borksen because Morena's good at statistics and concludes there should be anywhere between 50 to 60 more specialists on board. She brings up the example of Dogman encountering a wild Crollo to justify her concern about the time limit, but this example doesn't work. Morena stated herself she needs unawakened specialists. And Crollo is not someone you could just bork out of the crowd to bring back to your hideout. Even if we were to entertain this idea, Crollo certainly doesn't share the same goal as Morena. He wants to kill somebody in the short term, but his goal isn't to just kill people or destroy humanity like the Heil-Ly. And not all of those 50 to 60 specialists are unawakened, nor are they all going to align with Morena's goal. So while Morena is being honest for the most part, she appears to be exaggerating a bit to throw Borksen off her game. And this ends up working when she gets Bork to pick the no with a question mark card, despite her already having a good idea of the consequences of saying no. Yet Bork wastes her turn anyways and indulges Morena's invitation. If there's anything we can learn from this, it's to 1. Not play into Morena's fear tactics, 2. Ask for as much clarification as possible in her responses, and 3. Avoid the cards that she's gearing us to choose. Bork does luck out though when she gets further elaboration about the X card, with Morena explaining the concept of Nen limitations and how it increases the risk but also the reward depending on the result of the match. And Bork lucks out again with the sudden declaration of special martial law, since now the Heil-Ly won't be able to scout for another unawakened specialist. She uses the call to try and discern the location of the hideout, since the announcement broadcasted to the upper tiers are not broadcasted to the lower ones. She hears the announcement given to Tier 1, therefore concluding the hideout should also be here, but then quickly realizes that given the existence of these superpowers called Nen, they could have set this up where they can hear the upper tier broadcasts from anywhere on the boat. This incentivizes her to pick the deal card, as it would give her another turn to then pick the question A card, where she can ask as many questions as she wants. And after losing the X card on her last turn, she's down to only 2 options. A 50-50 chance between getting the return or the no card, or she can guarantee the X back to her deck if she selects the deal card. Obviously she chooses the latter option, but in return, we gotta give Morena a kiss. Morena explains there are 3 conditions to joining her group, and they don't need to be fulfilled in any particular order. She needs to kiss them, they need to say yes to joining, and they need to witness her or one of her members committing murder. As a side note, Morena confirms there are currently 21 members with her included, and we know that 2 of them were killed, so that leaves 2 spots open, meaning that Kenny Wang isn't actually part of Morena's crew, at least not officially. Rather, I'm of the belief he's already received Morena's kiss and has probably played the card game himself, but hasn't fulfilled all 3 conditions in joining Morena's gang. So then they kiss, but this gets off-screen like most climactic One Piece fights, and Bork immediately questions whether the cards were tampered with while they were busy filming their iconic Titanic scene. Morena is disappointed, using the analogy of a partner checking your phone to see if you're cheating, and I find this analogy quite fitting. It's like when someone suspects you of cheating without a justifiable cause, it's probably because they're cheating themselves, projecting their own fears onto their partner. And this ends up being the case with Bork, who at this very moment in picking up the return and no cards, makes a slight indentation on the edge of the return. This is why she ends up crumbling the return card later as a way to get rid of the evidence. This ends up working against her though, because cheating is treated the same as quitting the game. And Bork gets coerced by the game's Nen into choosing between yes or no as her final answer. Bork chooses the yes card to avoid her death, but it turns out that she wasn't actually intending to pick yes all along. Many people in the community believe Bork was planning to join the Heil-Ly after learning that she could speedrun her Nen training through Morena's contagion, and that this would be her safest escape route during special martial law. Not only was all of this proven wrong by the end, but there were hints suggesting otherwise well before that. After the declaration of special martial law, Bork realizes that she would likely be taken in for questioning and tortured if she were discovered to be at the Heil-Ly hideout. With the X card, she's able to withdraw from the game with her memory intact, which was the safest option she had. The issue now is that if she were to be investigated with her current information, she'd be at risk of implicating herself and her allies to be accomplices of the Heil-Ly. To circumvent this, Bork devises a plan. She states that if her final card is a return card, she would forget everything that happened here and walk away from the game. This is her attempt to form a Nen contract with Morena, ensuring that she'd have no recollection of the event to begin with, which would lead the army to view Bork as a victim whose memories were tampered with, eliminating suspicion, much in the same way Parison and Beyond's men were able to bypass Pika's dowsing chain during the Provisional Hunter's exam, since they had no information that could be detected as lies. By leveraging Nen vows and limitations, Bork could guarantee her and her friend's safety during this chaotic situation. At least that would have been the result had she not cheat, which likely voided the Nen vow she set. It was also widely believed that no manipulation would be involved, given Morena's seemingly honest intentions, with Borksen being able to make her own choices throughout the game. But this idea betrays the theme of the game, as well as what we've come to learn about both characters. As a parent, Morena allows Borksen to make her own decisions throughout the game, giving her the sense that she's got some agency. But the moment the child rebels or disagrees with what the parent wants, the child is punished, with the parent forcing them to make decisions that ultimately align with the parent's desires. The irony here is that when Morena asks Borksen if choosing the yes card was a mistake, Bork responds, "No, it's not a mistake." She's answering as if she's her own subject, mirroring Morena's earlier response about cheating. The difference here being, Bork doesn't make that decision herself. Rather, Morena is the one making it for her. I think this is clearly Togashi's commentary on the nature of the parent-child relationship. This meta-commentary applies to Nen in the same way. Bork is the equivalent of a child when it comes to Nen. She knows next to nothing outside of it being a superpower. Morena, the mother in this case, is teaching her child about Nen, even helping her to learn it. But Bork has to play by the rules of Morena's Nen ability, and only until she grows up can she then bend the rules herself. I think we're highly underestimating the power of the parent. One notable example is this queen, who's been cooking something pretty sinister, at the very least is having her two sons kill each other, likely to have control over the royal army. I've got more to say about this one before another video. But this all leads into the question everyone's probably wondering. What's Borksen's next move? And what kind of ability is she going to get? The only way for her to get an ability via contagion is by reaching level 21, and for someone who has a disdain for grinding XP, my best guess is that Bork is probably going to try to farm a bunch of XP in one go. Her inner monologue also suggests this to be the case, since she considers having to kill someone, not people. You probably know where this is going, but I think she'll target a prince, as it's an instant 50 level jump. But killing a prince is way easier than it sounds. As you go up the ladder, you start to run into some troubling Nen abilities. How do you kill a high level boss when you're only at level 1? You exploit a specific weakness that can one-shot them. So which prince has a major weakness we can exploit? Certainly not Camilla, who counters your every attack, and obviously not Seri, who is the equivalent of a party member to Bork. There is one prince who is in a very desperate situation on borrowed time. He's also the prime enemy of Seri, so I think our boy Benji should be high on Borksen's list of princes to kill. I've seen theories that she'll go after Heil-Ly. I don't have any direct counter evidence to refute this, other than the fact that killing a mafia-backed prince would be most beneficial to Morena, who wants something like this to happen in order to cause more chaos on the lower tiers. Bork is trying to stop Morena, not assist her in her goals, so that would be counterintuitive. For that same reason, I don't see her targeting Luzurus, and the status of the lower-ranked princes are currently unknown. Benjamin, on the other hand, is a dead man walking, and unless we see his Nen Beast do something to save him, or Tubeppa's Guardian Spear Beast concoct some sort of antidote, then chances are he's gonna die within the next 12 hours or so. Just like Hockenberg, who framed his death with the poison, Bork assassinating Benjamin, given she can manage to do this covertly, like taking his life when he's already succumbed to the poison, then this could be a way for her to easily level up. As for how this would even take place, I'm going to throw a really wild theory out there and guess that Kaiser will be the one to assist her. I'll save this one for my video in chapter 410, otherwise you'll be hearing me yap forever. As for the ability she would develop, there isn't much to speculate on, but considering her goal, her attempts at cheating the game, as well as the etymological meanings I mentioned earlier, I think an ability that preserves a stable future or breaks contagion in some way is definitely in the cards. If we think about JRPGs with mechanics that can be easily exploited at lower levels, perhaps she could break the game by doubling or tripling her and her allies' levels, or stagnating the members' growth through forcing level caps. Now that Borksen understands the importance of Nen limitations, it would make sense for her to develop a Nen restriction that targets the Heil-Ly specifically, kind of like what Kurapika does with the troop. One thing to keep in mind is Morena states that Bork would be a compatible organ donor, and tells Bork she'd explain what roles she's expected to have, as opposed to the Nen ability she'd have her learn. This leads me to believe that she wants Borksen to play the role of support, which would make sense given Bork isn't exactly the type to go around murdering people. There isn't much to go off of here, but I'm going to go full nerd and suggest her ability will be something akin to a skill tree from a JRPG. With the information we currently have, Morena's Contagion is a fairly basic leveling system. There isn't much to it beyond leveling up through points and gaining abilities. We know that stats are involved, since Morena has access to each member's stats, and interestingly, Bork is going around the hideout to learn more about each member. I think it'd be really cool if she could provide various stat and ability boosts specific to each member through leveling up. For example, granting a 20% boost and enhancement to a member after they gain 5 or 10 levels. It would be pretty complicated to execute, but I wouldn't put it past Togashi given the highly complex nature of this arc. But back to our question from the beginning. How do we beat this card game without cheating or relying on just RNG? I think our best shot would be the deal card. While Morena says that you must fulfill her request to use the deal card, she never stated that you cannot negotiate her request or make additional ones. Of course, there would need to be some form of equivalent exchange, but that wouldn't necessarily be against the rules. After all, there have been numerous times where Morena conveniently bends the rules herself, answering questions despite stating beforehand that she couldn't. So I think the deal card would give the player some room to negotiate with Morena. For example, if we found ourselves in the same situation as Bork, we could accept Morena's kiss, even agreeing to fulfill another condition of hers, like being a witness to murder. In return, exchange the no for the yes card. That way, we aren't vying for our survival with potentially getting the no card. Instead, we get a 50-50 chance between exiting the game or becoming a Heil-Ly member, which is the best option we have if we're assuming there's no getting around the RNG element of the game. This would also benefit Morena. She gets the player to fulfill 2 of the 3 conditions, and instead of having to kill the player if they get a no, she increases the chance of recruiting them as an ally with the yes card still on the table. But that is how you beat Morena's card game. Thank you so much for watching. I'm honestly blown away by the support of the first video. I was not expecting it to be seen by anybody, let alone people stealing what I said to make posts about it on Twitter. Regardless, I'm thankful to be part of this community on a series that I just don't think receives the attention it deserves. So thank you so much for watching and enjoying the content. If you haven't already, why don't you check out this video on how to end the succession war, since there are no conditions in doing so, and I'll see you all in the next one.